Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for your patience. I really appreciate it. I'm still working on my tech savviness, which is not quite where it's supposed to be yet, but I think we finally got it. Thank you all so much for being here today. I know you all have very busy schedules, so the fact that you're here means you're here to learn and grow, and I'm excited because that's what I live for. My heart is to really be there, educate people as much as I can, and pass on the knowledge that I've learned through the years. So excited that you're here to take this journey with me. And for those who are not familiar with me, I'm Dr. Rumbi. Full name is Dr. Rumbi Zaimudzong. I'm a naturopathic physician, but I go by Dr. Rumbi, and all my patients call me Dr. Ru or Dr. Rumbi. So our title for today is, as you can see here, So You're Making Progress. So why doesn't it last? And I want to quickly, share my heart behind this. This webinar evolved from interacting with everyday people, interacting with my patients, understanding their frustrations. And from that, I would get a lot of questions about, hey, look like things were going so well. What happened? And because of that, I really wanted to kind of reach out to other people who I'm sure are also going through the same thing, but probably don't have the answers or understanding of why it's happening. So tonight here is really not about fear, and it's not about overwhelming you with science. It's about understanding why so many people feel stuck, why symptoms can improve and then come back, why recovery sometimes feels so fragile, and why people can get inflamed or feel inflamed, exhausted, reactive, or unwell, even when they're doing everything right, because that's a huge frustration. And most importantly, it's about understanding how the body can get trapped in patterns that are much deeper than symptoms alone. All right, so with that said, let's go on right ahead. So, most people I work with are not always in crisis. Many are still functioning, they're going to work, they're showing up, whether it's being a mom, being a dad, doing everyday things. But underneath all of that, something feels off. And often that's the hardest part because it's like, here's the thing, it's not just about the symptoms itself. It's about the confusion, like not understanding what exactly is going on. And the feeling that progress never fully holds. It's like recovery is inconsistent and the body keeps reacting in ways that just don't make sense. And one of the biggest misconceptions about healing is that it should be linear. People expect to feel better, recover, and move on. And in all honesty, it should be like that. But sadly, more times than not, it's not like that. Many people experience something completely different. They'll sometimes experience temporary improvement and then a setback, then another flare, then another period of exhaustion. And over time, many begin to feel more reactive instead of less. That pattern is incredibly common, and it's often a sign that the body is still stuck in deeper signaling pathways underneath the surface. And with that said, there are a few things that I wish people understood earlier, because once you understand these ideas, a lot of chronic symptoms start making more sense. The first one is when it comes to inflammation, inflammation is not a bad thing. It's a protective, intelligent mechanism that our body utilizes to help warn us. It's basically a warning system. Whether you experience an injury or a virus, it could be anything. It's the body's way of alerting us that something is wrong and we need to work on that, right? And when it comes to prolonged or chronic inflammation, the problem isn't that the signal turned on. The problem is that it never fully turned off. And then the second thing that I want to highlight is that when symptoms start spreading, you'll find that often people start panicking. And one issue becomes several issues. Fatigue becomes brain fog. Stress becomes sleep issues. Food reactions appear and recovery changes. But that in itself does not mean that the body is broken. It often means systems are beginning to influence each other. And we're going to get more into this as we keep going. All right. So our bodies were designed to adapt to stress. What that means is no matter what's going on, the body is so beautifully and wonderfully made because it's able to change certain things for us to be able to adapt. So, what then happens when inflammation is prolonged is that that survival mode can slowly start becoming the baseline. What I mean by that is it stops your normal stops being the standard. And now, because you're constantly struggling with inflammation, that aspect becomes the new normal. And that's what I mean when I say survival mode becomes the baseline. And over time, the body begins to operate in a very different way. And even when those triggers are removed that may have started that inflammation, the body will still react in a completely different way because of what happened. So, with that, you'll find that we need to touch on something very important as we keep talking about this, and that's conditions don't exist in isolation from the rest of the body. So your environment matters, and that includes the air that you're breathing in, the food that you're eating, the people around you, how that makes you feel. All of that matters. Immune signaling matters as well. And when we talk about immune signaling, we're talking about how your immune system behaves, how your immune system responds to things that come at it. And because of that, because of the fact that you have difference in energy production from person to person, you have differences in recovery capacity, you'll find that this is one of the main reasons that two people can actually have the same diagnosis, but have two completely different experiences. So the goal here is not just to silence symptoms. The primary objective is to understand what's maintaining that signal in the first place, because lasting healing usually comes from restoring regulation, restoring your resilience, and recovering your capacity. So, who is this webinar for? This webinar is for people who feel like their bodies have changed over time, people who don't feel like themselves anymore, people who feel stuck between being told they're fine and still not feeling well. It's also for people navigating cancer treatment or recovery who sense that there's more affecting resilience and healing underneath the surface. So, what I want to do next is walk you through how the body shifts over time, not all at once and not from a single event, but through a series of changes that begin influencing each other. So, as I mentioned before, inflammation starts as a protection, right? Just like a fire alarm. It turns on because it's detecting something is wrong. Maybe there's a stress, maybe there's danger, injury, infection, you name it. And that response is very intelligent and necessary. And as I explained, the problem then happens when it does not turn off. So the first dominant that we're going to talk about here is a very good friend of mine called nuclear factor kappa beta, or in short, NFKB. NFKB is super important because this is the main dog when it comes to signaling inflammation. What I mean by that is when that damage that we just touched on happens, it's one of the first main people to yell out, danger, danger, something is wrong in the body. So we love NFKB. It's beautiful. It's amazing. It's one of those things that keeps us alive. The problem with NFKB, though, is if you still have that stress of whatever triggers it to start, it'll keep flashing on. Right. So when we talk about signals, like I mentioned before, that's where we talk about things like ongoing stress. And I want to highlight that stress can come in different forms. It can be emotional. It can be physical. It can even be something like over exercising. All those things are different forms of stress. It can also be ongoing inflammatory burden. And what I mean by that is inflammation is like a loop that keeps feeding into itself, unfortunately. It could be environmental exposures. So this is where we'd be talking about things like mold. We can even talk about things like microplastics, the air that you're breathing, the water that you're drinking. And it can also be something like chronic immune activation. And we're going to talk in more detail about that as our presentation continues. But what's important to note here is over time, that system begins to respond from an already activated state. And again, it goes back to then people now become easily triggered because they're already sensitive to something. And I think a lot of us can kind of relate to this based on our own reactions or reactions from people around us, that there's certain touchy subjects that you do not talk to certain people about. Because the minute you do, the reaction is always not proportional to what you had mentioned, but because there's already a history behind it, you don't say they're already, people then easily get triggered by certain things. The same way it happens in real life is the same way it happens in the body, especially when we don't get full resolution. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we keep going. All right. So when we talk about threshold, and we talked about that a little bit. We said it's like people start getting triggered more easily. And from a physiological, biological standpoint, this is where you hear people start saying things like, I react to things I've never reacted to before. Man, I used to be able to eat bread, and now I'm allergic to gluten. I can't even touch pasta because it makes me so sick. But when I grew up, I was able to eat it. That could be things like now I get all sorts of allergies. Pollen never used to affect me, but now I can't even go through spring without being medicated the whole time. Or for some people, it could just be lack of sleep. That's the way that their bodies are now sensitized to what's going on around them. So the issue is not always the trigger itself. It's that the body's threshold has changed. All right. The second domino that I want to talk about is called interleukin 6, or IL-6 in short. And the way that I like to kind of compare this, it's like the group chat that doesn't stop buzzing, right? So like we mentioned before, we have NFKB, which is our big alarm system, tells us, okay, danger, danger, something's going on. And then from that, you'll find that the signal gets passed on to what we call cytokines. And one of these is interleukin 6. The point of this interleukin 6 is it's a main messenger. So this main messenger's job is to literally spread the word. So like we said, NFKB says something's wrong, tells the messages, and then the messages go around the body saying, we have a problem, we need to elevate that inflammation. And the more that signal spreads, the louder the system becomes. So when you run labs, these are some of the labs that I know I especially will always run with any patient to see, to be able to assess where their inflammation is at, because more times than not, when IL-6 is elevated, that tells us a huge piece of the puzzle in terms of what's driving your disease, right? And then from there, like we mentioned before, as the signal starts spreading, it starts amplifying. And then at that point, like I said, the body will start amplifying responses. And as it is amplifying your responses, recovery becomes slower. Tolerance changes what you're able to tolerate, and the system becomes easier to trigger because, like I said, it's already sensitized, right? And eventually the body will start operating through that lens of danger all the time. It's like it doesn't know how to now relax, how to feel safe, right? So, and this one here, really, I love this slide because this is where biology becomes real life. Because what we've been talking about so far, we've been really focusing on the chemistry. And apologies, because I know it's not the funnest topic, right? It kind of reminds you of school. But the reason why I really went that way is because I realized it's so important to be able to understand how the body's processing things, how things are happening. So now we've talked about that. I want you to look at now the other aspect, like while this is happening in your body, this is what it feels like on the outside. So on the outside, this is where you have people starting to feel more exhausted. They're feeling more inflamed, they're sensitive, they're not as resilient. And often in oncology, this is where treatment tolerance and recovery begin looking very different. And what I mean by that is there's certain treatments where maybe initially patients were able to tolerate with oncology and they were fine, but something happens, there's a shift in the body, and now that treatment that used to be so tolerable becomes unbearable. All right. And because that happens, you'll find that at some point, especially when it comes to everything that we've been talking about, it stops being a temporary reaction and now becomes the new normal. And when things start operating differently, that's when there's certain pathways like JAK-STAT. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more. And this is our third domino. So JAK-STAT here is a signaling pathway. So best way to explain this is, again, we go back to NFKB. That's yell, danger, danger. Interleukin 6 and their friends spread the word, hey guys, we've got a problem. And then from there, now we have JAK-STAT. And then what JAK-STAT does in this situation is JAK-STAT will go to your nucleus where your DNA is, and actually change your genetic response. So I want to highlight something very important here. We're not talking about changing your DNA. We're talking about changing certain DNA expressions. And I want to pause a little bit here and explain a concept that a lot of people might not be aware of, which is DNA. Yes, it shapes who we are, but DNA is simply a blueprint. What do I mean by that? It is literally a blueprint. What matters is the directions it is given, what it is told to do, and what it is told to build. And there's so many things in the body, mostly from the gut, would you believe, that actually control how that DNA ends up getting built up. This is so important to understand, especially when we're talking about disease, because when we talk about, for example, things to do with oncology or cancer, we always talk about mutations. So if you can understand that mutations don't just happen suddenly, and they actually happen because signaling pathways change. The DNA is no longer told to produce X, now it's being told to produce Y. And 95% of the time when it comes to cancer, this happens because of the environment, not because of genetics. So this is one of my favorite slides because it combines the science, which I'm so passionate about, with the medicine too. So what you see here, and I keep beating that dead horse, but I feel that it's really important to understand this, which is understanding that we have our triggers, the different ones we've named. And then there's NFKB, danger, danger, activates. As soon as the alarm goes off, it goes and tells interleukin 6, as you can see right there, hey, we've got a problem. And then what does interleukin 6 do? It goes and it invites its friends, JAK. So JAK is interleukin 6's best friend. JAK kind of sits there outside the cell, big chilling. He's fine, he's having fun. And then what ends up happening is, as soon as interleukin 6 comes into the picture, interleukin 6 tells JAK, we've got a problem. You got to go tell STAT to change the situation because we've got some danger happening. So then JAK goes and tells STAT. STAT would then goes and tells the DNA there's a problem. So if this is short term, we're good, we're golden. Maybe you got a cut somewhere and your body has to raise inflammation to alert the body. Oh, no problem, no worries. But like we said, when that continues, that onslaught, what's now literally happening is now you've got what shouldn't have been permanent, but are now permanent changes at a genetic level. And this is how a lot of chronic diseases develop, because what will happen is, as this inflammation keeps amplifying, it starts telling the immune system, for example, hey, we've got bigger fish to fry. Can you calm down? Which affects immune system activity, right? And then you have things like tissue repair that gets affected because now the body's trying to figure out, where's the danger? I'm trying to fix that danger. So now that gets affected. And then in terms of cancer, the cells that were supposed to stop cancer growth now don't know what to do. Now they're just letting it roam free. You now have things like angiogenesis, which is basically when cancer uses blood supply and creates its own little nice house so it can reside and spread. So that gets affected. The way that the immune system reacts gets affected. And I know I talk a lot about cancer, but I also want to share that this can also apply to chronic disease as well, because all of these things start getting affected as well. And then from there, all right, just reading a quick question. We'll get to the Q&A in a little bit. So this is how chronic conditions like cancer develop. It starts with things like this, but as I continue to talk about inflammation, I do want to highlight that when it comes to disease and cancer, we have many drivers. By drivers, I mean things like mitochondrial dysfunction, gut dysbiosis, so many factors. But the main focus, the highlight of today that I really wanted to touch on was the role of inflammation in all of this. All right. Then when you look at the other side of it in terms of symptoms, like I touched on, while all this is happening, now brain fog feels worse. Sleep gets affected, pain. So what you're seeing is this is happening inside the cell right there. And then this is happening in your world. That's how your body's manifesting, telling you what's going on. And something that I always love telling my patients, because I know this to be true, it's your body's always trying to communicate with you. And one of my favorite sayings that every patient of mine knows by now is your organs shed tears that your eyes cannot, which means, in other words, your body will always speak. The question then becomes, are you listening? And it also becomes, do you understand what your body's trying to tell you? So symptoms like this are just the body's way of trying to say, hey, there's something going on. We might want to look at this. Right. All right. So as we mentioned, we talked about that continued signal that's happening and how now we've got STAT, right? Telling the DNA, hey, we need to change certain things because certain things are going on. And what then happens is the conversation becomes so much bigger than symptoms at this point, right? Because the environment of the body has started to influence repair. It started to influence immune behavior, growth signaling, and resilience. And in cancer biology, this is really important because abnormal cells are likely to persist in chronically dysregulated environments, such as those created with inflammation. All right. And then from there, I would ask myself this, or at least, as I started learning this, like, okay, you've mentioned that all these things are happening, but where's the immune system when all of this is happening? Why isn't it stopping this? And to answer that, I will say your immune system is constantly monitoring and regulating what's happening in your body. But as that chronic inflammation load continues to rise or creates noise, what ends up happening is that system that was precise becomes less efficient. So I'll give you an analogy. Let's say we've got the 911 dispatch, right? If it gets one call, someone is stuck, I don't know, hiking somewhere because we're in Arizona, or I'm in Arizona. It's easy to call paramedics. It's easy to call someone to go help. Then it gets 4 calls. Then it gets 6 calls. Now they've got 10 calls. At this point, they're starting to get overwhelmed. And the system that used to be so precise when it came to answering calls is not so much. By the time you get 100 calls, now they're putting people on hold. Even when they answer the phone, they're like, well, no one can get to you for the next 30, 40 minutes. So that's pretty much what starts happening to the immune system and other systems in the body. And when that happens, because of that noise, that immune system ends up losing its precision. And again, I highlight this is why it's so important because one of the cornerstones of what I do is always looking at the terrain. I absolutely love the terrain, which is obviously the body's internal environment, right? But my point is, when it comes to chronic disease and especially cancer, you want to look at that terrain because it affects how each thing works. And in this case, when there's a lot of inflammation, that's going to affect everything else within that terrain, like your immune system, like immune system being able to catch abnormal cells before they multiply and are now out of control. All right. So again, going back to inflammation, it's important to understand in terms of the body's processes or systems in stopping or regulating bad things. It's when situations like this happen, when things are now out of control, it's not because the repair mechanism is absent. It's still there. The body doesn't stop working. What happens is now the body's under tremendous strain. And when it's under that tremendous strain, this is when, again, it goes back to poor recovery, poor resilience, poor immune precision, and it affects literally the body's regulation and its ability to recognize and regulate abnormal changes. All right. So the take home that I want us to get from this is the body will continue or will try to do what it's supposed to do. It's activated, it's protected, it's responding. But many chronic conditions involve what I like to term failure of resolution. What do I mean by that? By failure of resolution, what I mean is the signals, like the inflammatory signals, stay active longer than they're meant to, which puts more strain on other systems in the body. So here, this is one of my favorite slides. Survival mode becomes a baseline. Reason being, and as you can see from the picture, what's literally happening is they started putting out a fire. The fire went out a long time ago, but the sprinklers are still on and the alarms are still blaring. What this means, if you translate it, is some people, they start feeling certain things, they start taking supplements, they go see doctors, they get medication, and they're like, okay, I'm doing all these things, but I still feel on. I can't seem to relax. I still feel jittery, even as I'm taking all these things that I'm trying to recover. And that's mainly because the body becomes conditioned towards survival instead of repair. And when the system is conditioned this way, progress often becomes inconsistent. Remember that slide that I had where I was talking about how healing is not linear? This is kind of what I mean, right? So it doesn't mean that healing is impossible. It just means the body's still operating from that previous survival baseline. And that's what causes the meandering instead of a straight path to healing. And while inflammation, as I mentioned, is a major part of this conversation, the body functions as a whole. And often, inflammation is actually not where the story started. It may have started in a completely different system, right? For example, when we look at gut dysfunction, a lot of the time in clinic, what I often see is someone will come to me and they'll say, I think something is wrong with my thyroid. I'm cold all the time. I'm constipated, typical thyroid symptoms. And then I'll go, all right, interesting. Can you tell me about your diet? And they'll look at me like, what's that got to do with anything? But as we keep talking, you stop realizing that, oh, now they're talking about bloating. They're talking about all these things. And what you end up finding out is they're actually struggling with leaky gut, which may have come from diet, but that's besides the point. The point becomes that leaky gut literally caused the immune system to get activated. And for those who are not familiar with leaky gut, I'll just give a quick explanation. Leaky gut happens when you eat something that your body ends up reacting to in a way that it's not supposed to. It causes your gut lining to become inflamed. And when that gut lining becomes inflamed, immune cells start coming towards that gut lining and they actually cause damage. So when we talk about leaky gut, it's actually damage from the body, not the food itself, because the body is reacting to inflammation or foreign things that it's not used to. And what makes leaky gut worse is now you have these microscopic holes in your gut lining, which means whatever food you eat goes straight into your bloodstream. And it's just like a snowball effect where the body's like, well, I don't recognize this. And then it attracts more immune cells to go to that problem. And then before you know it, you've got a lot of immune cells. And the problem is they don't just stay with the gut. They travel to nearby organs to whatever they like. And that's how usually a lot of autoimmune conditions can happen. So in this case, a lot of the time when people have Hashimoto thyroid issues, I always like to ask about the gut because more times than not, they actually stem from the gut. So going back to inflammation, so gut issues will affect immune signaling, like I mentioned, which can trigger inflammation. Another example is nervous system overload. So by nervous system overload, I'm talking about stress, maybe just, again, it can be diet because diet can affect your neurons, it can affect neurotransmitters, and some people, it keeps them wired. For some people, it's hormonal dysfunction, which ends up affecting your nervous system. But either way, when you have that nervous system overload, that can actually amplify inflammation. Mitochondrial depletion affects recovery. So what I mean by that is when you have that compounding inflammation, that means you have a lot of noise. That means now the body has to divert resources. That means now the mitochondria might not get as much oxygen as it actually needs to fully function, or because of everything that's going on, there's an increase in toxic load, which then affects mitochondrial function. And when a mitochondrial function is affected, now you have less energy. Not only that, when when the mitochondria is not functioning like it should, and mind you, it's important to understand that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. That means all the energy that we need, me sitting here talking to you, that's all mitochondria. And when mitochondria doesn't work like it's supposed to, the body starts rationing things because it's like, oh, we're only operating at 40% in terms of energy. So we need to divert our systems. Do we really need to think at 100%? Nah, we don't. Let's just put that at 80%. Now someone starts to experience brain fog. Do we really need to detox at 100%? Nah, we don't have the energy to do that. Let's operate at 80%. Now toxins are accumulating. So that's why, and that's just a small example to express how important mitochondria is and to show that it is so much more than just fatigue. It's every single function in your body. And then we have, like I said, toxic burden because now you don't have as much energy. So the liver is not breaking down toxins like it's supposed to. The gut is not doing that. Toxins are starting to build up, which creates a snowball effect and affects other things. And over time, all these systems that we're talking about, whether it's your metabolism or anything, they start feeding into each other. And that's how everything gets affected. And again, this goes back to looking after your terrain, making sure that all these systems are what they should be, because if one domino is affected, you have that trickle down effect. All right. So again, once we start understanding that, Then it's then easier to now look back and think, especially in terms of inflammation, what's maintaining our signal? And when I just ask what's maintaining our signal, I want you to go back to that NFKB, right? Our good friend NFKB, who I said is an alarm system. Alarms do not just go off for no reason, right? Okay, most of the time. But my point being, there's that signal. So even once the danger has passed, if that signal is still on, what you want to do is figure out what's keeping it on. And that's really important. So what am I saying here? I'm saying this is where the approach needs to be different. Instead of chasing symptoms endlessly, right? You're playing a game of whack-a-mole. A patient comes, I'm fatigued. Here's some adrenal support. Next time, oh, I just feel sluggish. Here's this. That's chasing symptoms, and that doesn't give you resolution. What you want to do is to ask yourself, what's maintaining our signals? What systems are under the most strain? What's preventing resolution? And then from there, you'll find that ultimately the goal is never just to suppress system. The goal is to the goal is never to just suppress symptoms. The goal is to support the systems responsible for regulation and recovery, because our bodies have that innate ability to heal themselves. So you have to understand what's driving the disease, and then you want to reduce that symptom load. You want to support regulation. You want to restore the body's resilience, and then you want to help to complete that cycle. All right. So with that, you'll find that for different tools support different parts of the system. So the tool that you use matters less than knowing why you're using it. What do I mean by that? I mean, it's not just enough to use, let's give an example of omega-3s, right? Like, okay, got inflammation, let's just use it. It's important to understand why you're applying that omega-3 in this instance. So what I have for you here is a very, very busy slide, I know, but here is just a list of different things that could be used to support different mechanisms. So this list is exhaustive, but this is not everything. As you can see, I didn't include gut, but you have things like nervous system regulation, right? If that is what's driving your inflammation, then you want to look into things like acupuncture, which is something that is so important for nervous system regulation. You want to look into things like mind-body medicine, right? Biofeedback. There's also other supplements that are not included here, like ashwagandha and all those that can help to calm the system. Once you do that, inflammatory signaling, right? You want to calm that system. You want our friend NFKB to kind of calm down. And there's so many things you can use for that. One of my favorite things to use for inflammation is curcumin. Curcumin is so amazing. It's existed for hundreds of years and has been proven to be so effective, especially in oncology, where it doesn't just decrease inflammation, it actually helps to, change certain genetic drivers. But that's a story for another day. So you have a lot of anti-inflammatory nutrition, resveratrol, quercetin, things like that, which play a very pivotal role in reducing inflammation. You have things like IVs too that can help in the sense, depending again in what's causing that inflammatory signaling, right? You always have to know before you apply it. Things like I said, holy basil, cat's claw. Like I said, the list is endless and we could go on and on about it. But my main point in bringing the slide up is I wanted to highlight that there's so many tools that you can use once you find your driver to reduce that driver, to stop that signaling. Because once you stop that signaling, then it's easy to get to that recovery process. All right. And then from there, I want us to understand that our bodies are not the enemy. Most of the time, your body is actually adapting the best way it knows how. And when we understand what systems are under strain, we can begin supporting the body in a much more intentional, effective way. All right. As I said, as I'm going to reiterate, the reason I want to reiterate is this is one of the most important parts, most important things that I want to leave you with tonight. If you forget anything else that I've said, because I know I talk pretty fast and we had a lot of information to cover, I want you to understand more than anything else that you are not broken. Your body is trying to adapt and is adapting more than it is failing. And the key thing here is to understand what is going on, because if we can understand our drivers and we can understand what's driving that signal, it changes how we approach healing. And it's important to understand that the goal is never to chase symptoms. It's not about symptom management. It's understanding what's maintaining the signal. Because once we understand that, the body starts to respond very differently. All right, that being said, there's different things you can do. And one of the ways that we can support you here in my practice, New Legacy Natural Medicine in Scottsdale, is we have different things that we do. I do what I call focused clarity sessions, which are some of my favorite things in the world to do. These ones are like a quick 45-minute appointment, especially for people who, again, some people are super healthy, but need better direction. For some people, maybe they're dealing with chronic disease or cancer. Regardless, what I love about this is we get to sit down and talk, and I get to really help them with goals and objectives on what's the best way forward. How can you navigate your own health? So I love that. We also have integrative oncology strategy sessions. These strategy sessions are designed to look at the bigger picture. So you're looking at symptoms, history, terrain, terrain, and with terrain, we're talking about inflammation, metabolism, immune system, all of that, recovery capacity, treatment burden, and we look at things like supportive strategies, but in a much more comprehensive way, right? And for other people, they're just simply overwhelmed and they may not even know exactly what they need. They might feel stuck. They might just be exhausted, confused, or unsure which direction to take. And that's where especially something like the Clarity Call can really, really help. One of the other things that we also do is I do a lot of supportive care. So we're talking things like mind body medicine. And one of my favorite things is acupuncture. Acupuncture is amazing and it's existed for thousands of years. And it's amazing because there's so much data supporting its use, especially in things like chronic disease and oncology, where it can help you to manage symptoms, even from chemo and radiation. And again, that's a whole different world, but I've seen such amazing effects with some of these treatments. And of course, this list is not exhaustive, but these are some of the things that we do here in New Legacy to support people as much as we can. All right. So with that said, I just want to thank you so much for being here. These are deeply personal topics for many people. And if any part of tonight helped put language to what you've been experiencing, I'm really glad because clarity matters. And now I'd love to open things up for questions. All right, and I see I already have a few questions here. Let's start with, let me see here. Oh, thank you very much. So someone was asking if I have podcasts. Yes, we do have podcasts, and my podcast is called Decoding Disease with Dr. Rue. And if you go to our website, you will see there's information more in there. You can actually listen to it on the website, but if not, you also find it on Spotify. You can find it on iTunes. Yeah, is it iTunes? My goodness, my tech savviness comes out here. But any platform that typically does podcasts, you will find it there. But I encourage you to go to the website because that's the best place. That way, whether you want to listen to it on the website or you want to listen to it on these different platforms, you can actually subscribe. I give out an episode. They're pretty short, like about 3 minutes long. So it's an easy listen. And there's always a new episode every day. So thank you. That was a really good question. The other question that I got here was about PCOS. Basically, how can I manage my PCOS and lose weight? All right. So this one, I want to start off by saying PCOS is actually increasingly being recognized as so much more than an ovarian condition. Because now people are starting to see that it's actually a metabolic and inflammatory disorder that's connected to like insulin resistance, hormone balance, and low-grade chronic inflammation. So with that, when it comes to supporting it, it's not just about restricting calories. This is something I'm always trying to let people know because a lot of the time when we think, oh, I'm overweight, most of the time, half the time, it's never really about what you're eating. It's about how your body's processing it right. So in this case, when it comes to PCOS, you want to focus on blood sugar balance. You want to assess where's your blood sugar at, where's your HbA1c, and then from there you want to look at how can you manage that. We're talking about protein intake. That's super important. Strength training, stress reduction, reducing inflammation. But while I say this again, because no two people are the same, it's important to talk to a provider who can help to really give you clarity and guidance so you can know what's really driving your PCOS and start from there. All right, next question that I have here is, even with the correct diet, I can't seem to get the weight down and inflammation under control. What are simple steps other than diet that can help me to achieve these goals? All right. So yes, diet absolutely matters, right? It's a big part, but that's just a small part of the picture, right? Are you sleeping enough? because more research is showing that when you don't sleep enough, that actually affects your weight. Because when you sleep, that's where your body does its rest and restore. You get rid of toxins, your nervous system is regulating, it's resetting. And if you don't sleep enough, none of that happens, which means, again, going back to what we were talking about with inflammation, now instead of completely resetting, you're starting from here. And it increases your cortisol levels when you don't sleep enough. So now your body's constantly in fight or flight, which makes it hard to lose that weight. You also have to look at your gut health. Are you really breaking things down? Are you getting the essential nutrients that you need? Because if your gut is inflamed or your gut is not working as well as it should, you could eat salmon until you turn blue in the face. But if you're not getting the nutrients you need, that's going to make weight loss difficult, right? Then we're talking about obviously exercising, walking after meals, morning sunlight, something that's really people don't think about, underrated, but it's amazing, right? And it can help to really reduce chronic stress. So I hope that helps. And then the other question that I have here is, what are some of the earliest signs of inflammation, or earliest signs that inflammation may be affecting the body long before disease develops? So inflammation often shows up as brain fog, fatigue. It can show up as poor sleep or insomnia, joint pain, mood changes, the body's not recovering like it used to. It can also show up like skin flares, easily getting triggered, digestive issues. So all those little things can be telltale signs of inflammation. But I do want to say, doesn't mean if you have them, you definitely have inflammation. Sometimes it could just mean you're not eating well, or it could just mean that, the environment you're in, maybe allergies. It doesn't always have to be something catastrophic. All right. And then the other question I have here is, why do so many people continue feeling unwell even when their labs appear normal? So here I want to start by explaining what standard labs really are. Standard labs are based on statistics. What I mean by that? What I mean is they look at a population, let's just say population of women from ages 20 to 40 something. And then with them, if they want to look at hemoglobin, of course, I'm sure they do a questionnaire and you're generally healthy. And then they draw your blood. And from that, they'll say, from this population, 95% of the people have a hemoglobin that ranges from 12.8 to 14.1. That's our normal range. So yes, while that might be the normal range for most people, it's not the normal range for everybody. And there's no way of knowing if you're in that 5% until someone actually takes a closer look. So I do want to start by saying, yes, normal labs are based on statistics, not to say they're inaccurate, but to say they're looking at the average population. And because of that, they may not always detect when something is wrong. Another thing I want to highlight too is when it comes to chronic disease and cancer, like I said, it's not something that happens overnight. It's something that develops long before labs ever notice that, labs are ever able to show us that. And the reason is because the body's continually adapting. Like I said, our bodies are so resilient. So if something happens, the body might take from another system to try to help you recover. So you kind of stay in that survival mode for a long time, where even if you draw labs in that situation, everything looks pretty normal, even when it's not. Right. So all these things are important to understand. So long and short of it, what I'm saying is standard labs don't always show early dysfunction. They often look for disease ranges, not optimal function. So a person can feel unwell because of stress, inflammation, mitochondrial issues, all those things, immune regulation, while all of these may not show in basic labs. Hope that answers that question. And then the next question I have here is, how do chronic stress and emotional patterns influence inflammation and healing? All right. So chronic stress keeps the nervous system in survival mode. And over time, this is going to increase your cortisol, your blood sugar, and affect your immune signaling, your digestion, your sleep, everything. So basically, when this happens, then the symptoms are not in someone's head. It's actually happening because that stress has now triggered a ripple effect, kind of like with the dominoes that I showed you earlier when I was talking about it takes just one system to cause all these things. So again, the take-home message from a question like this, where it's like, how does chronic stress and emotional patterns influence inflammation? Everything's connected. All right. And then the next one that I have here is, what role does the terrain of the body play in chronic disease? I love that question. So as I mentioned earlier, terrain refers to the internal environment of the body. It includes inflammation, detox, stress physiology, mitochondrial health, all these things. So basically, when we Oh, I lost the question. All right, yeah. So when we talk about terrain, so it includes all those things. So if we're asking how does it play a role in chronic disease, so chronic illness often develops when that internal environment becomes less resilient over time. How does that happen? Kind of like everything that we were talking about, right? Whether it's started by inflammation or mitochondrial dysfunction, it doesn't matter. What matters is eventually the body gets overloaded, it gets stressed, it gets exhausted, and now it's not as precise as it was before. And then the next question I have here is why is reducing, oh no, before that, actually, I missed one. How do you help patients begin identifying the root cause behind persistent symptoms? Love that question. First thing I do before anything else is I listen. Listening is so underrated, right? It's the most important thing because no one knows your body more than you. And you're going through it, you understand it. And the worst thing I can do is jump in ahead, shut you up, and go ahead of you and start talking about statistics and books. Because, yes, while that has value, you're a person. You're not a statistic. You're not a number. And it's important that I truly listen and understand what you're going through because that is the best way for me to get the information that I need to help. Right? That being said, some of the things that I will ask while I'm listening is where did the symptoms begin? What changed before then? Because it's not only important to understand when, it's also important to understand why. Why did you get sick today? Not last week, not last year. Very important question. And then I want to ask about environmental exposures, mold, gut, toxins, all those things, gut changes, sleep disruption, all of those things. Get answers to that. And then the next thing I want to do is run extensive labs and then start looking at clinical patterns. And then from there, it becomes easier to identify the root cause. Next question I have is why is reducing symptoms not always the same as restoring health? Love that. I think some people just from reading already kind of understand because we started talking about that during the presentation. Reducing symptoms can absolutely improve quality of life. And an example of that is with pain. There are times when, even in clinic, I've had to give my patients, especially oncology patients, pain medication. It doesn't mean we're saying the more integrative approach has failed. What it means is we understand that when you're in extreme pain, your body's in fight or flight. And when your body's in fight or flight, it's not going to do what it's supposed to do. So there is, it's important to look at all those things. So in saying that, I'm saying there is a place for symptom management, and that can be very, very important. But that being said, it's also then about understanding that symptoms are often signals of something deeper that's going on, right? That needs attention. So true healing not only asks, how do we reduce the symptoms? It also asks, why is the body producing those symptoms in the first place? Uh, the next question that I have here is, how does metabolic health influence inflammation and recovery? Great question. So metabolic health affects every aspect of who we are, every single system in the body. All right, that's the first and foremost. It influences inflammation, energy production, hormone balance, immune resilience, and when a metabolism is unstable, the body becomes more reactive and slower to recover. I do want to highlight that because I just assumed when we talk about metabolism, the basic definition of metabolism is how the body breaks things down or builds things up. And that's literally how you exist today. So if any part of that is affected, it will absolutely affect everything else. In terms of inflammation and recovery, if you have metabolic dysregulation, it's going to slow your recovery process. It's going to increase inflammation because certain things that you need to slow down or regulate that inflammation you may not have. They may be missing because of the metabolic dysregulation that's happening. So yes, metabolism can affect inflammation both negatively and positively, just like all systems in the body, because as we've mentioned before, everything is connected. All right. Now the question that I have here is, what are some common lifestyle patterns that quietly contribute to imbalance in the body? Great question. Poor sleep, chronic stress, processed foods, blood sugar spikes, right? Swings, dehydration, lack of movement, constant stimulation, like maybe from watching TV, playing video games, like you always go, 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 right? And not enough recovery time. All these things can push the body towards inflammation and imbalance over time. Next question that I have here is, how do you approach supporting patients who feel dismissed or unheard within conventional systems? One of my favorite questions. I actually live for this. So as I mentioned before, the first step is listening. And I will say a lot of patients that I see are patients who've gone through the ringer. They've gone, I can't tell you the number of oncology patients I see who come in and say, yeah, I went to my oncologist and he only listened to me for 7 minutes. And then the rest of the time he was telling me what we were going to do. And it was so frustrating for me. And I was so scared because he did not hear me. So again, listening is so important, right? And so for me, I try to create that space where patients feel heard, they feel understood, they feel taken seriously. And the way that I practice medicine is it's collaboration. It's you and me partnering together. And that's the only way it will work. Because I can take you to the river, but I can't force you to drink, right? In the same breath, you could have all the fight in the world, but if the doctor who's standing in your corner is not on team you, then that's going to be a very difficult fight if the doctor is only going through the motions, right? And then another question that I have here is, what is the connection between gut health and chronic inflammation? So I think I kind of explained that before when I was talking about gut health plays a big role in immune regulation. And another very important fact that's important to know is most of your immune system is actually in your gut. They've recently discovered that over 80% of your immune system actually resides in your gut. Not only that, you also find that over 80% of your DNA is actually regulated or controlled by the gut using the short chain fatty acids in your gut microbiome. So the gut is huge in terms of it's the second brain, something that we don't pay enough attention to, but we should. So, especially when it comes to, like we're talking about chronic inflammation. So, when digestion, the microbiome, or the gut lining become disrupted, they will result, they can actually contribute to inflammation throughout the body. Because as I mentioned, the gut is not just about digestion, right? It's our second brain, controls all these things, immunity, hormone, mood, energy, and how your DNA behaves. And then another question I have here is, how can people begin supporting healing without becoming overwhelmed by inflammation? See, I've got inflammation on the brain. Without becoming overwhelmed by inflammation. I always say start simple. I'm going to give you a perfect example of that to kind of illustrate what I mean. One of the hardest things to deal with, believe it or not, when it comes to healing, is telling a patient they have to completely overhaul their lifestyle. Most will look at me like, where do we even begin? Because most of the time, their water source is not good, so they have to change that. Their cleaning products, their beauty products are not great. The food that they eat. And if you just dump that in someone's lap, that's not sustainable, and people cannot maintain that. So what you have to do, as we say in Africa, we have the saying, you cannot eat a whole elephant in a single bite. You have to chip it one piece at a time. No, we don't eat elephant. It's just the saying. But my point is this, you start with one thing. So, for example, if it's like, okay, we have to overhaul your lifestyle, I would start with, let's start with your water. Let's just get a good water filter that's going to be clean. Once that becomes the norm, all right, now let's get rid of junk food. Let's start eating out less. If you eat out every day, how about we do it 3 times a week? Because the key point is you want something that's sustainable. And for something to be sustainable, you have to start small. All right. Question that I have here is, why is individualized care so important in holistic and integrative medicine? Beautiful question. And that's because no two people are the same. We have different experiences, we have different chemistry. Everything about ourselves is so unique. As unique as our fingerprint is how unique we are as individuals. And that's why you can never treat people as cookie cutter. You have to really understand. And it goes back to what we're talking. Remember when we're talking about drivers? We all have different drivers. And the only way to understand that is to treat people as individual people. And that's how you can understand what might be driving patient B's cancer compared to patient A's cancer when they both have breast cancer, right? It's understanding that. And then another question that I have here is, what does true healing support look like beyond medications alone? I love that. All right. So healing support includes nutrition, sleep, movement, emotional well-being, right? Gut health, metabolic health. It's basically creating an environment where the body can function more effectively. So medications can play an important role, right? But they're just one small piece of the puzzle. Everything else matters. Just like we talk about treating the whole person, same thing when it comes to utilizing tools. The more tools you have, the more options you have, the better it is at addressing the different aspects of things that you're going through. Another question that I have is, how do therapies like acupuncture fit into a broader integrative approach to wellness and recovery? Acupuncture, like I said before, is amazing. Not only can it help to support the nervous system, it can help with digestion, it can help with circulation. And I'm actually going to share a really quick story that I love sharing with a lot of people. And this happened at a cancer clinic that I was working at, where I was doing acupuncture on a patient, and this patient had lung cancer. So we would do it, and of course, I had a particular protocol I was using for that to help open up the lung pathways, the whole thing. But my point is this: we are into the fifth or sixth session. She looks at me, she goes, "My arthritis is gone." And I'm like, "Oh, what do you mean?" Because, it wasn't something I was thinking about. And she was in her 80s. She goes, "When I first started coming, for acupuncture sessions, my hands were like this. I could hardly move them. And now, oh my goodness, I can write again. I can knit. It's amazing, right?" And I say that to say that's the beauty of acupuncture. It's one of those things where it gently restores your body to what it's supposed. It doesn't force your body to do what it doesn't want to do. And that actually reminds me of a little story that some of you might find funny. So I think I was pregnant with my second kid, and so, of course, I think, yeah, he just decided to take his time. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go get acupuncture done. Hopefully, that will induce labor in a natural way. We'll go. Go for treatment one, nothing. Treatment two, nothing. Third time I go for acupuncture, we even use electrostim therapy where you tie like little electric. It's nothing. It's basically a way where you use electricity to push that acupuncture so it works better. Tried that. Absolutely nothing. I was so mad at this practitioner, who, by the way, was also my professor and had been doing acupuncture for 30 years. So it's not like he don't know what he was doing. And then he looks at me and says, "Well, you can't force the body to do what it doesn't want to do, and baby's not ready to come, and it just is what it is." So I say that to say, as mad as I was, it was such a powerful point that stayed with me. And to me, shows just how powerful it is, because when you look at it, your body wants to heal. Your body has an inherent ability to want to heal itself, but we have obstacles to healing. So when it comes to something like acupuncture, it's such an effective way to help support the body to do what it ultimately wants to do in this case. I hope that answers that question. And then another question, then I'll check the other platform, see if I have any other questions, is for someone feeling stuck in their health journey, what is the first mindset shift you hope they begin to embrace? Well, I hope they begin to understand that the body is not necessarily broken. They hope that they begin to understand that symptoms are a sign that the body is trying to adapt, it's compensating, it's responding to stress and trying to fix that. So, and when we can begin to understand those signals instead of fighting against them, healing can start, because then we start listening to the body. All right. And I think I have one last question. I could be wrong. Let me check our Q&A. All right, I think that was it. I don't think we have any other questions. All right. Okay, and if that's it, again, I just want to say to everybody who came, thank you so much for attending, and I hope this was truly helpful and beneficial. I've also here, like I said, put my contact. If you want to know more information, you can go to newlegacynaturalmedicine.com, where you can also find the podcast for someone else who had asked earlier where they can get the new podcast. And I'm here in Scottsdale, Arizona. Or if you have any questions, you can email me at care@newlegacynaturalmedicine.com, and I will get back to you. I make it a point to get back to everyone as much as I can. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and I will see you in the next webinar. Bye for now.